The real issue has been the building code. The government claims that the building code is essential to drive reform and to effect cultural change. The unions, in particular the CFMEU, claim that it will reduce the number of apprentices, increase the number of foreign workers on building sites and make work sites more unsafe. These claims are false. They are lies. This debate was intense, and I had many productive discussions with the CFMEU last year, which led to my office securing a number of amendments. These amendments included introducing judicial review for the first time, to legislate for impartiality of the ABC Commissioner, and if there wasn't impartiality, the union has a right to take the Commissioner to court, a right they did not have before, maintaining safeguards for the use of examination powers, and also reversing the onus of proof, which was unfair and onerous on unions to take stop work meetings for safety reasons, so it was in line with the Fair Work Act. On any measure, on any objective measure, these were good amendments that strengthen the rights of the union and that strengthen the rights of workers. I also secured a range of amendments to the building code, including a strengthened security of payments framework that is now underway so that contractors who don't comply with security of payment legislation face exclusion from Commonwealth-funded building work. We're now seeing a lot of these issues being debated again, and it's worth mentioning that in terms of procurement policy, we have seen, as a result of the debate in that bill, as a result of negotiations, that we've seen the biggest changes ever to Commonwealth procurement rules to ensure Australian-made goods, to ensure that the steel complies, the steel used in Commonwealth-funded work not only complies with Australian standards and taking into account Australian work practices, employment practices and environmental practices, but also, fundamentally, for any work over $4 million, it must take into account for the first time the economic impact of procuring locally. These are big changes. These are changes that no less than Senator Kim Carr, the Shadow Industry Minister, praised, making it very clear that he opposed the ABCC legislation, but acknowledged that these were real and significant changes, stunning changes to procurement laws in this country that will make a real difference to Australian jobs, to Australian standard goods being used in construction work. Now, we're seeing these issues being debated again, and we're dealing with the issue of the commencement of the building code. I supported the legislation last year, and I supported a shorter 9-month transition. The Senate passed an amendment initiated by Senator Hinch that pushed this date to 29th of November 2018. We've heard that over the course of the summer break, Senator Hinch changed his mind, and despite claims to the contrary, he did this because of the small to medium subcontractors in the building industry who feel that they are being bullied and threatened and intimidated. So that is my position. That is the position of our team. We need to bring this on. And I've too spoken to those smaller contractors, those smaller and medium contractors who feel that they do not have the protection needed, that this will force them out of business if we have an undue delay. Now, that's triggered a campaign by the CFMEU, and I say this more in sorrow rather than in anger. I've now had to seek legal advice in relation to billboards, and that is a matter for, under the defamation laws of this country, to see how that will be dealt with. Now, when the CFMEU says I've betrayed the steel industry, the changes to Commonwealth procurement laws are dramatic, and they will be enforced from March of this year. This will give local industry an advantage in bidding for a share of the $60 billion annual procurement expenses that the Commonwealth Government incurs each year. These changes in particular will favour local steel producers, and no less than the Australian Steel Institute came out saying that these are big changes that will make a very real difference to Australian steel and Australian industry. These are changes that have been welcomed by no less than Mark Menther, the administrator of Arium, who has spoken out about this, who is at the moment going through a process of selling Arium to a number of potential bidders. And these procurement rules will actually make it easier to secure the future of Arium and the many thousands of jobs in Whyalla and around the country that rely on the future of our steel industry. I've been a vocal supporter of stronger anti-dumping protections to minimise the amount of imported Chinese steel that floods the market. The bill I put up several years ago, Brendan O'Connor, as Minister, actually acknowledged that the government was forced, the Labor government was forced to bring about some changes as a result of that bill and that process, which Senator Cameron had a very constructive part to play in. And we still need to reform dumping laws even further, and there will be a resolution in the Senate tomorrow on this, about making workplaces unsafe. Of all the claims, this is the worst. These claims are not backed with any evidence, and this is just appalling. Clause 9.3 of the Building Code is explicit in ensuring workplace health and safety laws are key to this code. Companies put their ability to undertake Commonwealth-funded work at risk if they breach workplace health and safety requirements. The Building Code does not make any changes to right of entry for safety purposes, and as I said earlier, the rules were strengthened to give unions the right to stop work without the onerous provisions of the previous code under the previous Act. These are matters that must be taken into account, and I will not be lectured to by anyone in this chamber or by the unions when it comes to industrial safety, given that I pushed for industrial manslaughter laws, which I still support. Don't be so rude, Senator Cameron. Don't be so rude.
Order.
Oh, well, you just sarcastic, rude. You're not advancing this debate. I support, for many years, and continue to support industrial manslaughter laws, because if an employer puts a worker's life at risk and that worker's life is lost, then the chain of responsibility needs to go to the very top of the management in that. That is a matter of fact in terms of what I've done in the South Australian Parliament. When it comes to issues of asbestos and safety, in 2005, the South Australian Parliament rarely, unusually, and a very rare event, passed a private member's bill I introduced to ensure that the compensation mechanisms for asbestos victims and their families were overhauled, and they were radical changes that both Labor and the opposition, the Liberal opposition, supported at that time. They were real changes that have helped many hundreds of asbestos victims in South Australia, and they are still in place. I just want to go through to the issue of the code. The 2016 code contains a workplace health and safety conduct clause, but Labor's 2013 code was silent on this issue. The 2016 code mandates compliance with safety laws and sets specific requirements for asbestos training and safety, but Labor's code was silent on this issue. The 2016 code contains penalties for not complying with workplace health and safety laws, but Labor's code was silent on this issue. The 2016 code requires tenderers to demonstrate past compliance with workplace health and safety laws, but Labor's code was silent on this issue. And the 2016 code prevents work going to companies who have breached workplace health and safety laws, but Labor's code was silent on this issue. The 2016 code prevents head contractors from using subcontractors who have breached workplace health and safety laws, but Labor's code was silent on this issue. That is a matter of fact. To say that I've betrayed apprentices is again more lies and fear-mongering. The code does not prevent or restrict the employment of apprentices. During negotiations with the government agreed to include a legislative note after subsection 11(3)(a), which states that it does not prevent the inclusion of clauses in an enterprise agreement that encourage the employment of apprentices. So I think that these are the sorts of matters that need to be put on in relation to this. So when Brendan O'Connor, Mr O'Connor, in the other place, talks about issues of asbestos and safety, those comments are unfounded. They are false. They are false. That's part of this post-truth world that we now live in. I just want to say that in 2005, those laws for asbestos compensation were adequately overhauled. In 2004, the industrial manslaughter legislation introduced in the South Australian Parliament was not supported by the major parties, but interestingly, the Australian Greens in the South Australian Parliament picked up on those laws, and to their credit, they acknowledged the work that I had done a number of years earlier in relation to that. These Commonwealth procurement rules are something that the Labor Party never brought into play when they were in power. They had an opportunity to do the right thing by Australian industry and by Australian workers, and as a result of good faith negotiations with the government, those rules have now been changed significantly, substantially, and dare I say, I'm sure there's some in the Labor Party and I dare say in the coalition, and Senator Cash is nodding her head, who probably were pretty nervous about these changes brought into play. But these changes are a big deal for Australian jobs and for Australian industry, and I do appreciate the comments of Senator Carr in relation to this. In terms of foreign workers, Senator Cameron knows that we worked together on a Senate inquiry in 2012 on 457 visas and other visas, and called for tighter rules to give preferences to local jobs. The security of payments legislation reforms will make a big difference to many thousands of subcontractors who've been dudded in the past. I just want to conclude that we will have a substantial committee stages of this bill. We do not support, my colleagues and I do not support a gag on debate. This will go as long as it needs to, so all the questions can be answered, so everyone can ventilate their point of view. We do not support a gag in the way that Senator Cameron did, in the way that others have, in the way that the Greens did in previous debates. We are in the group of post-truth politics, where it's more important to tell the story you want rather than tell the story that the people should know. And that is why this legislation is important, to make sure that the code does what it's meant to do. And what's in it for us, and that's the question posed by Senator Hanson-Young, it's about the small and medium operators not being pushed around, to ensure that we have a strong construction sector that can employ more and more Australians on decent wages and conditions.